Okay, Julia.
Great, thank you, Chris. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this open meeting of the Science and Engineering Policy of the National Science Board. My name is Julia Phillips. I have the pleasure of chairing this committee on National Science and Engineering Policy for this two-year term. And Matt Malkin is the vice chair of the committee. I'd like to start by taking roll. It's a select committee at the moment, rather small, because of the pause in appointments of new members. Okay, Suresh Babu, Dorota Brzezinska, Mel Huff, and of course, Matt Malkin.
Here.
Okay, great. Okay, I know we have a number of other NSB members and consultants on the phone. Let's go ahead and identify yourselves. I'm going to try to scroll through my screen. Roger Beachy.
Here.
Suresh Garamella.
Here.
Marvi Matos Rodriguez.
Here.
Yes. Dorota Brzezinska.
Here.
Great, thank you. And Bev Watford.
Here.
Okay, Merlin Theodore.
I'm here.
All right. It was sort of musical chairs on my screen. So did I miss anybody? NSB members or consultants? Oh, Wanda Ward, yes.
Wanda Ward here.
Okay.
Vicki Chandler just joined too.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, it's great to see so many of you here today. Our board liaisons are Amanda Vernon and Alexandra Serchel. Our executive secretaries are May Aiden and Stephen Dietz. And we're also assisted by Andrew Shazinski, a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow. Today, we are kicking off in a very real way Indicators 2026. This is our first detailed narrative outline to discuss and vote on for the first of the three thematic reports for Indicators 2026. This particular offering is on discovery. I'd like to thank everyone on the committee for your engagement in this cycle. It's a really important one since we are really reinventing indicators yet again, and I think it's very exciting. And also I'd like to thank NCSES for your partnership, the excellent work you've done as we implement the ambitious changes to the suite that were approved by the board in May of this year. Quick recap of the changes. I think most of you are familiar with them, but just to be sure of that, this cycle, we plan to have 4 main reports, 3 thematic reports, down from 9, I believe, on STEM talent, discovery, and translation. And then the culmination is, of course, the biennial summary report, the state of U.S. science and engineering. That summary report serves as the congressional deliverable at the end of the cycle, and that will be released in March 2026. Seems a long time from now, but it will be here before we know it. The thematic reports will be released over the coming 2 years leading up to that March 2026 date, aligned as best we can with data timeliness. So that affects the order and the publication schedule for those 3. In addition to the thematic reports and the summary report, we're developing and launching a new public indicators data dashboard, and that will build from the model of our current data dashboard for state level indicators. So we have a really good model to follow, and that will help a lot as we roll it out. The dashboard will provide important and timely information. Sorry, I got lost here. And it will typically be more specific than what you will find in the thematic reports. There will be data trends and longitudinal data, that sort of thing. Like the state indicators website, which is updated quarterly, this data tool will enable us to access more timely data updates than we can possibly do using the every other year reports that we historically have done. And it will enable us to develop more streamlined and focused thematic reports without losing the breadth of information that is available somewhere and readily accessible, that helps to ensure that Indicators is the gold standard source for data on the U.S. science and engineering enterprise in a global context. Finally, we plan to develop and release Indicators policy neutral special topics throughout the next 2 years as issues of particular importance arise. Further work on defining those topics will be happening in SEP committee meetings to come. And I'd like to thank the board members for chiming in and volunteering for your personal engagement in reviewing the different thematic reports, the dashboard as it rolls out, as well as for working on special topics. So you all will be called on at various times to engage on all of that activity. Of course, Indicators is prepared under the guidance of the board by the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, or NCSES. This, as you know, is an independent federal statistical agency that is located within NSF, and we're always glad to be working so collaboratively with our NCSES colleagues. This example of partnership between NCSES and the board is really, I would hasten to say, a gold standard for the type of partnership that we seek to have with the foundation overall, and we really appreciate it. Staff have sent an outline in the form of a draft narrative outline, or DNO, as we've come to call them, that summarizes the topics, data sources, and substantive changes from the 2024 edition that the authors have planned. In particular, they've noted the data components that, rather than being included in the thematic report, are included to be included in the data dashboard. So we have a hint of how it is envisioned that those two products the information be divided between those two products. As a reminder about this meeting, our consideration of the outline today is our major opportunity for board members to shape the content of the report. This board input and suggestions provided at this point are most useful because the concrete has not yet started to set. And so they will be particularly helpful to our NCSES colleagues as they seek to fully develop the report. This is especially true this cycle, of course, given the shift in our approach to report development. And your input during the DNO stage is really critical. At the end of this meeting, if we have a quorum of the SEP membership, we will vote on the outline at the end of today's call. But this vote will be taken with the understanding that NCSES will revise the DNO, the outline as needed based on the conversation today. The revised and final DNO will be shared with the full SEP committee. NCSES has also shared a list of report reviewers. If you have suggestions for that reviewer list, and I understand that that is in the diligent book, or if it is not now, it will be soon. If you have suggestions for the reviewer list, such as additional perspectives or topic areas of expertise, please email that information to Matt Malkin and to me, and copy Amanda. We'll share your suggestions with NCSES as they finalize the reviewer list in their broader process to make sure that we have balanced coverage of each report's topic areas. Let's not talk about that, those suggested reviewers on the call today. Following the presentation by the report authors, which is coming up next, the lead reviewer, Matt Malkin, will start the discussion. I'll then provide my review since I'm the secondary reviewer, and then we will open it up for general committee discussion with the authors. At the end of that discussion, if we have a quorum of the committee, we'll have a vote of the committee on approval of the narrative outline, subject to any input we may give the authors today. Let's remind us all that the 22-24 instantiation of the SEP committee settled on the major umbrellas for each of the 3 thematic reports and discussed a preliminary version of the detailed narrative outline you are considering today. So it's developed and matured significantly since that earlier version of the committee got a look at it. But we have seen it, and what we see today, I think, is highly recognizable from what we saw before. Are there any questions or comments before we get started? Okay. At this point, it's my pleasure to turn over the floor to the report authors, Francisco Morris, Alexander Rhodes, and Benjamin Schneider. As I said, the lead reviewer for this report is Matt Malkin, and I am one of the 2 additional board reviewers. We're saving the other supporting reviewer role for future board appointees. Francisco, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. And again, I'm Francisco Morris, and I'm here with my co-authors, Benjamin Schneider and Alexander Rhodes. Welcome to the discussion of the first thematic report for 2026. We want to start by thanking comments and reviews already received, and we look forward to the discussion this afternoon. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a new report, the discovery report, combining information from R&D expenditures and research publications. So the major objective of the report is to analyze both domestic and international trends in these 2 major areas. For example, for R&D, we'll be covering economic sectors and industries, and research publications will be discussing indicators by scientific fields and other indicators, as we're going to discuss in detail very briefly. So this new report is composed of key financial and publications indicators from 3 reports from the just concluded 2024 cycle of the indicators reports, namely the Research and Development Report, the Academic R&D Report, and the Publications Output Report. So across all sections of this new discovery report, we plan to include domestic and/or international information, namely on the domestic side by state level as the data is available, and then international comparisons and major regional groupings. And the sections will be also including information on critical emerging technologies as data is available for the different data sets and sections. So with that, we are going next to cover the 2 major areas of the report, R&D and publications, in more detail, starting with the R&D content. And for that, my colleague Alex Rhodes will take over now. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. I'd also like to thank the Committee on National Science and Engineering Policy for the opportunity to present this outline. So yes, as Francisco mentioned, I'll be presenting the research and development content of the outline, and it's comprised of 3 main sections and will be similar in structure to the 2024 Research and Development U.S. Trends and International Comparisons Indicator Report. The first of these sections will be national patterns of R&D resources. The second will focus on specific U.S. R&D sectors, including business, federal government, and higher education institutions. And the third, focus on international R&D comparisons. And for this first section, national patterns of R&D resources, we plan to analyze high-level trends in U.S. R&D performance and funding across sectors. And a few of these indicators will include our total U.S. research and development performance, as well as R&D intensity, which is the ratio of R&D expenditures to gross domestic product, or GDP. We'll also include information on R&D performance and R&D funding across time and by sector, including businesses, government, higher education institutions, and nonprofit organizations. We'll also cover R&D performance by type of R&D, including basic research, applied research, and experimental development. For the next section, we'll focus on specific U.S. R&D sectors, the first of which will be the business sector, where we plan to cover a variety of indicators, including R&D performance by source of funding, so whether that funding came from the company itself, from the federal government, or other domestic or foreign businesses or others, as well as industry-level R&D performance with a specific focus on knowledge and technology-intensive industries, many of which were covered in the previous R&D indicator report as well. We'll also present data on domestic net sales and R&D to sales ratios by industry. For the second sector, we'll cover the federal government, and some of these indicators include data on federal obligations for R&D and R&D plant, which is the facilities and major equipment utilized in R&D, as well as federal obligation data for research by agency and by science and engineering field. We'll also cover federal obligation data by agency and by type of R&D, so basic or applied research and experimental development. We also plan to cover the higher education sector, where we plan to incorporate data on higher education R&D as a share of total US R&D and by type of R&D, so basic or applied research or experimental development, as well as data on federally funded and total higher education R&D by science and engineering field. We'll also explore data on federal agency support of academic R&D expenditures by agency. For this report, we'll also present updated information and trends on research and development in emerging technology spaces, including US business R&D performed by the semiconductor manufacturing and other select industries, as well as US business R&D performance by technology area focus, including software, biotechnology, nanotechnology, and artificial intelligence. We also plan to include the latest federal funding data on R&D related to the CHIPS Act. And for the third section, we'll focus on international research and development comparisons. This section will analyze US R&D in a global context, and will include comparisons with economies including China, Japan, Germany, South Korea, the European Union, and others on indicators such as gross domestic expenditures on R&D, or GERD, and R&D intensity, as well as data on the composition of country R&D performance across all sectors, including business, government, higher education, and private nonprofit organizations. And with that, I'd like to introduce the next speaker, Benjamin Schneider, who will cover the publications content for the report. Benjamin.
Thanks so much. So as Alex said, I'm going to close this out today, overviewing the publications content for the Discovery Report. So the publication content is going to be a pared down version of the previous publications output, US Trends and International Comparisons report. And similar to that report, we're going to divide it into 3 different subsections on scientific output, scientific impact, and international collaboration. We're going to limit the narrative to the most salient stories that we find within the data, but tables and figures will remain for readers to develop their own stories and, of course, investigate data further in the data tool. And like previous reports, we primarily rely on the Scopus database. So to start with the scientific output section, we're primarily focusing on overall time trends at the comparative country level. This is both in terms of overall production, as well as the top scientific fields of the top producers. We'll also focus on national level analyses of the United States, primarily with respect to scientific field trends over time. Ultimately, the indicators in this section will help provide context for the developing competition between our top producers by looking at overall output and then the respective subcomponents. The scientific impact subsection will focus primarily on the production of highly cited articles as a proxy for scientific impact. And we primarily rely on our highly cited article ratio, which is the proportion of a country's total overall output that is represented in the global top 1% of scientific publications. This section will be a short section, but is going to be extremely important to the quality versus quantity debates and storyline that many of our readers are very interested in. Finally, the international collaboration section is going to begin with a overview of the time trends of the international collaborations of top producers, and then move into the top collaborators and trends over time with the United States. We're going to move on to discuss the relative co-authorship index, which shows countries' propensity to co-author with different countries, as well as a relative citation index, which similarly looks at the propensity of different countries to cite either other countries or research produced within that country. Finally, there's going to be a sidebar with a research network. In the past, we've looked at topics such as COVID-19 research and artificial intelligence research, and currently we're looking to explore the research network on semiconductors. So with that brings us to the end of our prepared remarks for today, and we'd like to thank you so much for engaging with the Discovery Report, and we're looking forward to your questions and comments.
Well, thank you very much for that informative and very concise report. Really appreciate it. At this point, I'm going to turn the conversation over to Matt Malkin, who will open the floor for discussion and questions. I'll note that Matt and I conducted our reviews in the context of the DNOs that were
Hey, Julia, you're breaking up for me. I don't know if you're breaking up for everyone. You might want to turn off your video, Julia. Sorry.
In 2024. So we had were able to do a side-by-side comparison, which we found quite helpful. Matt?
Thanks, Julia. So,
Well, okay, over to you.
okay, sounds good. Let's see. So, generally, I'm very happy with the direction that this is going, and that the changes make a lot of sense to me. And so really I'll just, before we get to everyone else's comments, which is very important, I just put out a few things that were on my mind. I'm not sure if this would be interesting to other people, but just some things that I noticed, and then we'll hear from others. When you're looking at R&D, of course, which is what we're doing here, it's multivariable, multifaceted. It's kind of a big matrix. For example, when we're looking at the United States, we're interested in where the money comes from, the funding. That could be the federal agency, it could be a nonprofit, it could, and in many cases, looks like a growing share of it could be from business and industry. Then we're looking at the type of research. Is very important, and it's just divided now into these big categories: basic, applied, and then there was I didn't write it down, but anyway, and then of course, so those are big boxes, big matrix elements. But I'm particularly interested also in the science and engineering field, or sometimes it's called the technology focus, because you're going to find big differences in these different boxes depending on, I don't know, for example, whether it's electrical engineering or computer science, or I don't know, some particle physics or something like that. And so my understanding is, well, we're very interested in this rapidly rising business component of R&D. That's really an important trend. However, I just wanted to make it, I wanted to understand better, are we going to have this fairly fine-grained information about where the large growing business R&D investments are happening, by science and engineering field or technology focus, however you want to call it, because it's pretty obvious that it's going to be very heavily focused in some particular areas, probably more applied areas, that will have immediate market implications. It may have very little overlap. For example, with some of the more basic research, for example, at NSF is famous for leading the funding of. Now, maybe this information will be available in the data dashboard tool that we'll have, for nerdy people like me that want to get down into more granular trends and so on. Perhaps that would be in there, which would be great. Another thing besides figuring out sort of the details of where the industrial R&D is going and where the federal R&D is going and so on, is I'm very interested, and again, it's a sort of question of how granular you can be with the data. I'm very interested in comparing what the US R&D expenditures and investments are with our key international competitors, and in particular in a number of key areas. For example, semiconductors. I mean, these are some critical and emerging technologies, things that are maybe related to national security, for example. And so I just want to make that's going to be tough, right? Because when we're doing international comparisons, I don't know if some of the other big countries, let alone China, for example, but even some of the more open countries, I don't know if they give us the information so that we could, for example, compare, okay, what different expenditures are going on in America from business and the federal government and so on in semiconductors. Could we compare that to what's being expended in semiconductor R&D in some other countries? You know, a head-to-head comparison. In other words, we can't just look at some gross number and say, here's applied research. You know, here's a country which has been catching up with, you know, and challenging the United States. That would be interesting to know, but I really want to know, okay, where are they catching up to us? Which particular areas of science and engineering, which particular technologies? So maybe that's already planned to be available in these reports, and which would be great. Let's see, I had a few other things about future reports, but I think we can talk about that later. Let's see. Yeah, so that was probably my biggest interest in it. And it may already, it's pretty obvious that the people writing this have already considered this and given it some thought, I bet you. I was getting down a little bit into the weeds. This is a fun one for Benjamin here. You know, I'm an academic kind of nerd, and so I'm very interested, of course, in the publications. I especially am glad that in addition to just looking at the total quantity of publications, which tells you something interesting, I really like the fact that they also look at highly cited articles, right? You want to know quantity and quality of impact of this research in certain areas. And I'm sure that this has been thought about a great deal, but it is not completely obvious how you figure out what the top 1% articles are. Basically, really influential articles start with a bang, you know, have often having high citation rates every month, you know, for the first year, the second year. And then, of course, some of these highly cited articles that really influence the field, they can change the field, will continue to have high citation rates for years. So it's a dynamic. So measuring what the top 1% articles are is a somewhat dynamic process, and I'm sure that Benjamin and the folks he works with have thought about that quite a lot. That's sort of getting down into the weeds. But to sum up my thoughts and open up the discussion, I think that there's a lot of very important information that can come out here. A number of other people have suggested other things which I thought were interesting too. And then it was pointed out, well, we can't do everything. We can't get completely buried. For example, Suresh Babu, I guess, is maybe going to present this himself, but he asked a very interesting question. Can we do this broken down by each of the 50 states? I thought, that would be very interesting. And then it was pointed out, yeah, that's like about 50 times as much data as doing it for the country. So that there's got to be some limit to how much information we can expect to get done here. But always more is better. Anyway, I see Suresh has his hand up, and now I think I've blathered enough. Let's hear from other people what their thoughts are.
Okay, thank you, Matt. I have come back in on the phone. I can't see hands. I am going to very briefly summarize my comments, and then I will try to, unless Suresh Babu has joined us, I will try to summarize his comments as well. First of all, you know, congratulations to the NCSES team. I think this outline looks really good. When you respond to our comments, I'd like to hear you reiterate what the vision is for the length of these thematic reports, because that rather seriously bounds what can actually go in the thematic report compared to what can go in the dashboard. So that is one point that we're going to want to hear about. This business about the growth of business R&D is clearly a very high interest. I will just second Matt's comment that breaking that down by S&E field would be extremely helpful, because our premise, and I think it's borne out by what data we have, is that business does not invest monotonically across the fields of science and engineering. And so understanding where it's very strong and where it is less strong is something that I think is in our interest to know more about.
Yes, if we can get that information from them, because I just see a comment in the chat from Merlin that said sometimes they may not want to tell you all the specifics, perhaps.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
Even if it's not at the same level of granularity as we have for federal investment, which is quite granular, I recall from earlier thematic reports and supplementary tables, something would be very helpful there. And then the understanding how U.S. investment stacks up against investment in key competitors, international competitors in key areas. And in your remarks today, it sounds like you are planning to do that, and I think that's really important because the global comparisons, I think, are one particularly valuable component of indicators overall. And those axes, this business about fields and both internationally and between the different sectors in the U.S. are also potentially important for publications. I had a couple of thoughts about standalone special topics one was international comparisons, as I talked about earlier. And second, there were some things about longitudinal data on R&D, for example, in HBCUs or MSI institutions and in EPSCoR states. Those are things that are of great current interest in Congress. And so I think it would behoove us in indicators somewhere, whether it's in a thematic report or in a standalone report or set of reports, to treat those. And finally, thinking about Dario's focus on the changed R&D landscape, thinking about opportunities for analysis across the sectors and that kind of thing. So those, in a very brief nutshell, were my comments. Suresh's major comment was about the state level funding data. I think it's pretty clear that does not belong in the thematic report, but maybe state indicators or the dashboard or some combination thereof is an appropriate place to be looking at state and regional data for that kind of thing. Okay, I need someone else to help me with hands.
Julia, before we open it up to everybody's comments, which is very important, I'm wondering, we put out a lot of things on the table right there. Could we hear first from some of the NCSES folks who are on the call now, who may have some immediate responses or thoughts about some of the things we just talked about on the table?
That would be great. Okay.
Yes, thank you both for your detailed and thoughtful comments. And yeah, we look forward to cover many of the topics that both of you have detailed in terms of business trends, scientific fields, and the like. So the report will be expanding a little bit on what we did last time with some information that we have coming up. So semiconductors and the like will be covered as well, that we initiated last time. So yeah, we look forward to cover very much all the topics that you mentioned. And with regard to industry comparisons across countries, we will be reviewing the data that we do have from the OECD, which is the standard standard setter in terms of international comparisons. And based on what is maybe available there, we'll be happy to incorporate some of that as well. We already, of course, use data from the same source for many other things. So we'll be including some information pending some internal research. So we thank you for all of those comments. So that's kind of in general. I don't know if Benjamin or Alex have anything more in detail, but yeah, we look forward to work on all of the topics that were mentioned so far. Thank you.
I can Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh,
No, please.
all right, perfect. I can quickly answer the highly cited article question. So the way that this is calculated is it's by the year scientific field level. So for instance, if we're looking at the highly cited articles in the biological sciences in 2012, it is the top 1% articles that were published in 2012 in biological sciences. This is recalculated every time that we do this report. So if we have, there's something to say about like a slow burn article. So if it's an article that doesn't pick up a bunch of publications early, but does later, then that'll join the top 1% at that point.
That's what I was afraid of. What if it's published at the end of the year? You really want to look 12 months since the publication.
So perfect question. And we do have a 2-year lag. So we allow there to be 2 years for citations to accrue before those are calculated.
Good.
Yes.
That tells you something. That was down in the weeds. But it's good. Carry on.
What is the envisioned length for this thematic report?
This is Jason Gallo from NCSES. About the same length of the previous TRs, Julia.
Okay. So it's a 30% reduction per topic, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's very helpful. Okay. Amanda, can you help me call on or Matt, maybe you can moderate this discussion?
Matt, you're muted if you'd like to.
Suresh Garmel has his hand up first, but and then Marvi, I see her hand is up, and so
My hand was getting tired. Sorry. So along the lines of what Julie and Matt said, I think one piece which would probably be useful in our external engagement as well is as we map these research publications and impacts, if it's possible to identify those that had an NSF funding contribution. Obviously, Punch kind of celebrates at every meeting, you know, a Nobel Prize or some other award that started off as an NSF award. So unlike the state level detail, my sense is maybe this isn't as hard to do and perhaps very effective. If we said
great idea, you can do an automatic search of the acknowledgements for NSF.
Right. Yeah, if you say 60% of these studies are whatever, some number like that. So if it's possible, I'd like to hear whether that can be done. That's one. Two, so I'm almost done serving on a National Academies report. They often refer to NCSES numbers and reports and all that, which is great. I wondered if NCSES benefited from their work. And in some of these instances, they've got some pretty exciting and well researched reports. So perhaps we should benefit from those as well, especially when it comes to research in China and such. It's obviously a different basis, different kind of work they do than NCSES does, but there's a lot of color, a lot of facts, reports that they fund to, and so that's the second question. And the third one is a weedy one because, like Matt, I'm an academic. So I shared an article with some on the board about these impact factor, the issues with impact factors, or H indexes, not impact factor, H indexes in particular, and how there are countries that are almost on a wholesale basis, sort of pushing for self-citation. In particular, China, there was an article how the numbers were so high. So I wonder if there's any filtering possible or any vetting possible of some of those numbers. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Let me interject on your NSF point first, Suresh, then I'd like to hear from NCSES. If that is possible, I think it's only appropriate if one does that across federal agencies and not specifically about NSF, because this is a national good kind of thing. It's not just about NSF. So I'd like to just broaden that question.
So yes, I'll take it. So Christina Freiman, Deputy Director. So I'm going to take it because I don't think we had a chance to introduce Jason Gallo, who is the new Science, Technology, Innovation Analysis Program Director at NCSCS. So but there's some historic questions that I'll take. So yes, in a lot of papers, there is funding acknowledgements, historic funding acknowledgements. The quality differs because sometimes people used to say, thank you, Department of Navy, but funding organizations have gotten smarter about this and have required more machine readable. So the Scopus database and also other competitor databases do have that information where people provided it. So we're very, very dependent on PIs providing it or authors providing it. We did have a sidebar in the last thematic report on publications on those funding acknowledgements for all agencies, not just NSF. So we can revisit that data and see if anything had changed, and it might just be data that we put in a tool because it really is stationary, but we can discuss that more when we're finalizing the outline. So that's one. So the National Academies report. So we ourselves engage with the National Academies. In fact, did commission a Science, Technology, and Innovation Indicators report a number of years ago, which does guide a fair amount of the stuff that we do. And so where those reports make sense to cite in literature as background literature, we do. But if there's a specific report that you think would be really applicable, I'm not sure if the suggestion is to actually include data from those reports, but we're certainly open to that always. I think the last question was about impact factors, and so there's a lot of issues with using bibliometrics as an indicator. There's an issue with every indicator, right? If it was easy to do, we wouldn't need to do this. We wouldn't all need to come together and agree on it. And there's, as part of that Academy work, we actually commissioned a great paper on what makes a good indicator, and we include it in the Science and Engineering Indicator Methodology pages. And we're really shedding light on a part of the ecosystem. It's the collection of indicators that gives us the picture, but there's probably something wrong with every one of them, and there's something great about every one of them. And impact factors and or highly cited numbers, they all have issues, and that's why we make sure that we're transparent and we provide the technical documentation, and we have an extensive technical documentation that is published along with our report that explains those caveats. But we hope that we're shedding light, and we do. It's part of our fitness for use as a statistical agency that we look at the indicator. It might not be perfect, but it might be the only thing we have, and so we make sure that we're properly caveating it, but we also don't want to we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they used to say. So we'll make sure that and that's why we have peer reviewers also, to make sure that we're making it clear and transparent. So hopefully I addressed all three. Please let me know if not. Okay, great.
Marvy's hand has been up for quite a while.
Sorry, looking for my mute button. I have a question actually around the priorities of NSF in regards to what's discussed in the indicator reports. This question actually applies to not just the discovery report, but it applies also to the translation report and to the talent report. And so the idea here is how can we align the topics of priorities of NSF and the roadmaps to be created so to the indicator reports or vice versa, right? So the idea is we have basically work that the NSF leadership is doing on the creation of roadmaps that will help us with a message with priorities at NSF, how can we basically align those goals? Because I'm thinking that these will give it a very dynamic perspective to the indicators. It will make them, pretty exciting, I think. And as a result of that, it could also provide the context for people to be more excited about receiving that information, right? Because you receive it in the context of something much bigger and as a part of a bigger message, right? So now this is tricky, and I understand that, because it's like, if you actually try to align the reports with what's in work, this will make it such that there's a very dynamic environment for the requirements of the indicator reports, which might not be ideal. So I see the potential issues there, but it would also give it, as I said, a lot of excitement, right? And maybe a bigger context. So I guess, to go back and to, for the NCSES folks, how are you aligning the reports, right, to the dynamic priorities within NSF?
Let me jump in here, Marvi. And the first thing is that NCS, the indicators, one of the greatest values that indicators provides is longitudinal data, and it is not, the premise of the value of indicators would be experience great upheaval if we changed what we were looking at, every 2 years. One of the great values, and we saw this in some of what we were looking at in K-12 education and the like, is being able to look back over 10 or 20 years and see what is changing or what is not changing. I think the better opportunity for being that, and a lot of the indicators are highly relevant to the direction, the strategy of NSF, the strategy of the board, and the movement of S&E across the nation generally. And looking at how the numbers change in these various statistics over the years or aren't changing is a very important tool as one looks at both the evolving strategy and the implementation of that strategy. In terms of more dynamic, the other thing is that these data are typically 2 years old at a minimum. So you're not getting real-time data at all. They are all lagging indicators. I think the place where you want to look at the dynamic and the more immediate things is in the perhaps the standalone documents that we're talking about, and in the various policy pieces that we put out that draw heavily on indicators and other data that NCSES either has in hand or is able to help us identify. But it is a rather different product. There are people that depend very heavily on indicators and on its, evolving, but not changing so much that they can't find what they've always been able to find. So we have to tread very carefully there.
Thanks for that, Julia. I want to refresh my question on the perspective of, I am not talking of the data being collected or even the data being reported. I'm talking about the focus and perspective of a bigger context of how that, how the conclusions or the perspective or the descriptive, basically data is presented, right? Within what context? And so it's a general question, but it's not necessarily pointing out to wanting to change the data being collected and reported. It's more about the focus and perspective of what that data means, right? And also in what context.
Well, you do have to be very careful there, because NCSES and indicators is policy neutral. So yes, you can talk about, to some extent, what the data mean, but you can't talk about what you should be doing about it policy-wise. That's for the board. So it's
understood and not in disagreement either. Understood and not in disagreement with that point either. notice that it is about a matter of providing a bigger perspective of, why that data is important and in alignment to the priorities. And it was just a question of like, how well are we aligning?
I think Dan's comment is a good one here. This is, and Julia has mentioned before, this is about all the research outcomes of U.S. government and private sector investments, not only NSF. And to take it, the only way I could imagine that could be done is if there were national priorities that were established by the White House or by Congress. But those also change on a regular basis. And I think Julia and the thesis for why the indicators are important is that they are policy neutral. They simply record. I hear what you're saying, Marvi, and I think it would be great if we could do it, but not in the context of this. I think the place for the report itself, I think the place for that will be in these one-pagers that come out later. I think that would be a good place to emphasize what you're talking about. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, Marvi, we can talk about this offline, and I'm very happy to do that. So I look forward to that conversation. Matt, we need to think about wrapping up. Are there more questions?
I don't see more hands, so I guess this is last chance to raise your hand. No, don't see him.
Okay. Okay, terrific. Thank you very much for that.
Roger,
I do have a question for Benjamin. Benjamin, as you set out the areas for examination, the topic areas, research areas, would you repeat those again? I didn't know if I heard biotech and bioeconomy in there, and wonder, because that has been a major focus of not just this administration, but the prior one, and the amount of investments that are going on in commerce and in NSF and other agencies is significant. I wonder, I didn't hear it, maybe I just missed it.
So with respect to the sidebar with the research networks, that was the focus on that was semiconductors. The research that you mentioned, since we're showing all research, those are going to be covered by one of the 14 scientific fields that we also subset on within the report.
And those will be dashboarded.
Those, if they're specifically dashboarded, I think is more a decision that would be made, but I don't think that those are representative at the scientific field levels, but I think we can explore that.
I'm just curious, just wanted to know how granular you were going to be. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up.
Right. Okay, terrific. Thanks very much, Matt, for being the referee on that. Amanda, do we still have a quorum?
Yes, you do.
Okay, well, that's awesome, because we're going to now take a vote. Thank you very much for that discussion. This is especially important since we are doing something pretty different here, and we want to do the best we can to get it right. So, and thank you, NCSES authors, for doing a terrific job on the DNO. I think we're ready for a vote. And so we are taking a vote of the SEP committee to approve the narrative outline as amended, or at least as considered for amendment based on the discussion we've just had. Only SEP members may vote. So consultants, I know you care passionately about this, but you're not allowed to vote on this. So I would ask those who are on the SEP committee to, if you are in favor of approving the narrative outline, please unmute your microphone and say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, anybody opposed? Any abstentions? Awesome, the narrative outline is approved. So thank you very much, and we will move on. The input you've provided during this telecon will enable the SEI team in NCSES to develop the draft report, which will be distributed for SEP and board review as part of the external review stage of the report development. I had hoped to be able to spend a few minutes talking about outstanding policy relevant or policy outreach ideas that jumped out while we were having this discussion or as you reviewed the DNO. I think it's going to make more sense to have that conversation at a later meeting. So invite SEP members and all of you to be thinking if there were any outstanding policy relevant or policy outreach ideas that jumped out to you. And if there were, please send me, Matt, and Amanda an email about that, and we will have a conversation in a future SEP meeting. Thank you very much for a useful set of discussion, and I'm really pleased to have had so many board members participating in the conversation. This concludes our business for today, and the meeting